Okay. So it should be, yay, it should be good to go. I am really, really excited about this. So
Woohoo!
we can check our phone just to make sure, guys, we may actually be live on time or at least only 2 minutes late, which is a super win for us, I think, anyway. You take wins where you can get them. Uh, so let's go to my phone. There we go. And yes, we're live.
That's
All right.
amazing. It's
Hello,
a
everyone.
miracle.
We're live. It's so beautiful. All right. Hello to anyone out there. No one. Otherwise, we're gonna just hang out and talk for a bit here because it's. Oh my goodness! It's now like has it delayed on my phone. So let's go back. Let's get off that.
I am talking to myself, watching myself,
Isn't it
talking to
weird?
myself.
Okay. So anyway, we are here. It's exciting. If you're here and you can make it, that's great. I know I usually do like these big, massive lead-ins to this, or at least promote it a bit more. But I was busy finishing a book. And when you're finishing a book, you know, sometimes everything else has to go until the book gets done. That's kind of where I was towards the end of this one.
Priorities.
Yeah, you know how it goes sometimes. Because especially when you're finishing a book and you have other things to do. So, like, any bit of your spare time is pretty much just the book.
Yeah.
Like, that is it. That's all you do. It is just the book. There is nothing else. So, but I am here, and the amazing Amy is here, and we are doing the awesome things. And if you can show up, that's fine. If not, well, we're going to have a nice chat here anyway, and you can listen to the replay. So, first thing here with this, we are talking about mental health and humor and action books and all of those things because why should the angsty books have all the fun? So, quick question for you, Amy, to put you on the spot here.
Sure.
What's a book, movie, or show that made you laugh out loud and then also like you felt it? Like it made you feel
Oh,
seen. It made you like it got near to your gut and you're not even sure how it happened. And then now you couldn't think about anything else.
I gotta think about that
I know.
because it's
And you,
on. Well, honestly, it's been a while.
uh huh.
Um, so I'm trying to think of one that would fit because trying to think of the last book that I like ugly cried in.
Well,
Um,
or you could have just like felt satisfied at the end too. It doesn't have to like be ugly cry or anything. You can also just choose like, well, not something that was super deep, but also you could just choose the movie that we're talking about tonight. That's allowed.
I mean that Thunderbolts, yes, was is an excellent example.
Hmm.
Um, I well, and I know we were talking about this before we
Yeah.
came online, but um, the last book that I read that actually did hit me kind of like a gut punch
Hmm.
was actually The Way of Kings.
Uh huh.
I was
Okay.
shocked. It
Hmm.
was one of the whole. I've read some Brandon Sanderson, and
Hmm.
he's very good, but I had never really resonated with anything that I have read from him before. And
Hmm.
now, granted, it only happened in the maybe the last 100, 200 pages of my
Hmm.
1,000 page doorstop.
Hmm.
Um, but it was understanding a character's motivation and the pain
Hmm.
perhaps that the character had experienced, and just this idea of betrayal that
Hmm.
is resonates so deeply that you can't help but connect with it if you've ever had anybody turn on you.
Hmm.
And I don't know, I got really mad on behalf of this poor character. and but at the same time, I do not think that this one character would have been as engaging if he weren't so human,
Hmm. Hmm.
and if he were not surrounded by so many characters who look up to him
Hmm.
and appreciate him and sort of allow us to see his humanity,
Hmm.
um, humor included. And so I would say, yeah, failing the Thunderbolts. The Way of Kings is the last thing I've read that really,
Hmm.
as I was actually sitting in my chair over there reading it, and I hit this one place and I went, You gotta be kidding me. And I started texting other people who I know have read the book saying, this bad guy, I hope he never meets me in a dark alley. Uh, because I'm so threatening, you know?
You are fierce.
I'm,
You are so fierce, Whirly. They don't
I
even know
am
what's going to come after
powerful.
them. Yes.
I will give you a dirty look and then I'll feel guilty about it. No. Uh, how about you? What's one that you've read or watched recently?
Oh, this is hard because like I've done some rewatches recently that were
Yeah.
good, but they were like for different reasons. So I don't think there was something that I personally felt the gut punch. Well, I rewatched the TV series Moonlight, not Moonlighting, Moonlight. It was like a short run,
A
one
little bit
season
different.
TV series. Has a vampire. Pretty sure Moonlight didn't have a vampire. Um, it's one of like my secret, like people like, what is this thing that helped inspire your things? And I'm like Moonlight, but no one's seen it, so they have no idea like how much that.
I haven't seen it.
Oh, you
Let's
need to. He is
no.
like vampire floof who's also doomy and fierce, and it is great. Like Mick St.
Okay.
John, like people are like, "What's your inspiration for Cendric?" And I'm like, he had a lot, but one of them was Mick St. John. He is fantastic, but I didn't really like sort of feels that one much.
Yeah.
It was more of like he was a floof, so you got to beat him up.
Oh, of
As
course.
you do. Like he just gets horrible things happen to him.
Yes.
I don't think, and this is probably in a different way. I recently finished On the Edge by Alana Andrews, and it was the first of the Edge series.
Okay.
And I was really in it because of the world building sounded really interesting. I'm like, I need some different world building, and it was set in Georgia, like South Georgia, and like in this like out in the woods kind of community and such. I'm like, I'm ready for something like this. This is nice and different than the usual urban fantasy stuff. The magic was totally different and very simple but very well done. But I really felt it with the main character because in that one, it's this character who it's fascinating because when you're in her head, you don't always see how much trauma and difficulty she's had because she has just very earthy, this is just what you do.
Right.
This is what happened. I tried this and then I got this really good magic. And then my daddy had to kill 3 guys who tried to kidnap me for it. And that's happened. No one's going to get me. Like, it's just very, like, very matter of fact, kind of
Yeah.
earthy, real kind of thing, which has horrible trauma. But then she had a grandmother, and the guy who was trying to like court her sort of kind of they're a really fun couple because you find out he had his own motivations, had nothing to do with her, which is hilarious. But the grandmother was a great character for how she saw that, and she came into the book a number of times and said, listen, you don't know what she's gone through and she won't tell you because she doesn't even understand how bad it is,
Yeah.
but this and this and this, and she's 22 and has had all these things happen to her and she doesn't even know how much she's hurting. So unless you are, so grandmother pretty much didn't ever trust he was going to be a good guy, which he did end up being a good guy, but she was just so much like she's been through all of this.
Right.
And that sense of having that being seen as shown in the page there was something I hadn't seen very often. A lot of times I think in stories you have to rely on the main character, but if your main character is super unreliable because they can't think about their own trauma, which I think is a real issue. And it makes, especially for urban fantasy or certain things, the main characters are like horribly traumatized and never own up to it.
Well,
But
that's
I loved
realistic
how the
though to a certain
grandmother, yeah, it was so refreshingly realistic to not have her suddenly, like I was expecting, okay, she's going to have this giant meltdown and fall sobbing into his arms and it's going to be completely like a personality change because she doesn't do that. They didn't do that because they used the
good.
grandmother to get
Ooh,
around and
good.
say,
I'm glad to
you
hear
know,
that.
basically, if you don't back off or do something better, like, if you do this, it will break her into a million pieces and she will not come back. And then I will find you and curse you and you'll be died because grandma.
I love that because it is such a that's a unique take on
Yeah.
trauma. I think because when you're living
Mm-hmm.
in a traumatic situation and you can't really change anything,
Mm-hmm.
it's not like you can stop. It's
Yeah.
not
You
like you
just
can
have
just
this like
stop doing
tunnel
what you're
vision. You're
doing.
just like, I've got to do it. I've got to
Yeah.
do it.
So that's an interesting way to portray a character in a really realistic way. I've
Yeah.
heard of Ilona Andrews. I haven't read her. So,
Yeah. I've read some of her. I haven't read, I don't love a lot of her. It's not her, it's a male and it's a husband and wife team.
okay.
And I don't love some of their more heavy romance stuff. I just it wasn't my thing, but I've
Yeah.
loved the Innkeeper Chronicles. Those were good. That one was world building heavy. The first book was also great with characters. After that, I felt like they're either really good at world building or really good at characters. Sometimes they're not always good at both.
Yeah. It's a
But then
thing.
but this one, I was just curious because I'm like, I love the idea of this deep South heroine who works 10 hours, who goes over like into the broken, which is the earth part of things, works 10 hours a day as a maid, and she doesn't get paid well because she's not allowed to be there. And on the other side is the magic things, and she can't go there because if they find out that she has magic and she's from the edge, she'll get kidnapped and like brought into someone's as a concubine or something. And so she's
Interesting.
there defending, she's there in this little shack in the edge with her shotgun and her two younger brothers because her mom's dead and her daddy done run off and all she has is her grandma. And I'm like, I love this character so
Okay,
much.
now I'm really curious. So, gosh, here's another book on top of the to be read
I
stack.
know, I
It never
know.
ends.
So that's something to think about authors is when, and this was a really, I don't always love multi POV things when it's like infrequent. It drives me crazy.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, but in this case, that grandma happened to be two POVs scenes, but they worked because you
Very
wouldn't have
cool.
gotten that character set otherwise because she didn't even see her own issues at all. It was part of the fun of it. She's just like,
That's a good way to use the multiple POV though. Um, especially, well, I just because you add a second or third POV in doesn't necessarily mean that they need a completely different arc or goal or anything. They can simply be for context as long as they're clear. Um, which, that's the problem. Huh.
so anyway, also for anyone who was like, "Oh, Alana Andrews," you'll have to like skip a page in this book if that, but you see it coming a mile away. It's super easy to skip, and the rest of the book is worth it. So just go for it. I think it was that during that time when there was a pressure from the trad houses to add in scenes,
Ah,
the
yes.
but the authors didn't necessarily always want to do that. So it was like just skip it, and the rest of the book is awesome. You won't miss anything. So, with all of that being said, let's dive right into the main part of this. Welcome. This is the Author Culture Podcast, where we are
Woohoo.
all about helping ambitious science fiction and fantasy authors just like you find your unique success in a chaotic publishing world that is only getting more chaotic by the day. And I am joined tonight with the fantastic Amy C. Williams.
That's
Yay!
me.
That's me,
Yay.
which you might recognize her because she co hosted the Author Elevate podcast, which I did previously. And now she's doing awesome things with Author Conservatory.
Woohoo.
And she ran a publishing house for a bit. Then she ran a publishing house with me for a bit. And Amy just knows things and is just a fantastic person to talk about this stuff. And also,
Aw.
when I went to see the Thunderbolts movie, I was like, okay, this is doing something really cool that people are connecting with. And whenever I see that happening on the screen, I'm like, okay, I got to talk to people about this
Hmm.
because I don't see enough authors being aware of this. And this is really connecting in a way that's timeless. So it's not just a trend. They're actually tapping into timeless elements. Okay, who's seen Thunderbolts that I can just talk about with this? And I was like, Amy, get over here. We're going to talk.
I got your message and I laughed. Like, have you seen Thunderbolts? And I was like, yes. Let's talk.
Yes. Get on the podcast. Let's talk.
Because it's
Yay.
Thunderbolts was like a breath of fresh air.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
It was. And I loved seeing that across the board. Sometimes you see things that really just work, but then you don't see that connection like across the board with reviewers. And
Right.
this is one that reviewers like, hey, this is a thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, yes, it is a thing.
And I mean, I should probably make the caveat that I love the Marvel movies. Like
I do too. Yep.
it is I am and I would never be a good movie critic because I like things too much,
Mm-hmm.
and I always am able I love to find the things that are good, and I love to find the things that work. And I mean, I will listen to the critiques and the all the negative people
Mm-hmm.
who bash things, and I will admit I am a huge honest trailers fan.
Honest trailers is
Um,
amazing.
they're
Yes.
fantastic. But for me personally, you got to do a lot to really make a movie that I don't enjoy in some way. And while I have a lot of foibles and things that I can point out with other Marvel movies that have happened in the recent phases, I can't tell you that I just despised them. Now there were some shows that I had some issues
There were
with.
some shows I was just like, why did we make this?
Why is this here? What
Why?
is the point of this?
What?
And but overall, I have not had major complaints
Hmm.
about any of the movies that they put out. And but that being said, my enjoyment of Marvel movies had cooled
Hmm.
significantly since 2020. And I not that I didn't enjoy them, but I just, well, one, I could no longer really prioritize the time to go to the theater. But was that because I got super busy or because I didn't like their movies as much? I can't tell you which one is true.
Hmm.
But I went to go see Thunderbolts in the
Yeah.
theater, and I was really glad that I did, because
Yeah.
I feel like they are starting to rediscover some of the elements that made Marvel so impactful
Yeah.
and made it resonate with people. So I'm really excited to get to talk through some of the things that I've noticed.
And there'll probably be some spoilers out there for y'all. Just warning you. We're gonna. I mean, come on, guys. We have to. So just go see it, or read the summary. Or no, go see it. It's really cool to see it, especially if you haven't. Like, just see it, and then yeah. Oh, Sophia. Hey, Sophia. Super glad you could make it. Go ahead and shout out how you're feeling, all of that stuff. So, in terms of talking about Thunderbolts and what makes Marvel special and what was that it factor, I think it's really important to unpack this because I think it's really easy to go, oh, well, that was a Marvel, that was their golden age, that was this. And to really understand why something's a golden age and to figure out how it can work for you and how it can even tap into things that you could be good at and don't realize, you have to unpack it a bit. And
Exactly.
so I think one thing that especially the early Marvel movies did, when we're talking about like Iron Man and we're talking about Captain America and such, they went to those hard places with the humor. They did both. Like Iron Man in his first movie went through a really crazy journey with that. And he had to face that his weapons were that this whole life he'd built was really hurting real people. And he couldn't face that and having to work through that. And that with his sarcasm, they work together really well. And I mean, he's a great example because that character in general just kind of deals with life with sarcasm. So
Yes.
you can work with that.
Tony Stark is the master of the quip.
Hmm. He really is. But having that level, one of the classic Marvel things is having this character who is dealing with this baggage, but then also having to keep going ahead anyway in some way. And of course, there's different ways you're doing that. Like Captain America is a little more of a characters around him are going through things. He is more of very much a straight man kind of character,
Yeah.
which is why you have to beat him up so much. Like the really earnest ones, you just gotta
You can't let up on them. they
no,
they have to
no.
go through stuff, and then you have to put them in situations where they are uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
or where their mindset or their perspective is
Mm-hmm.
so different from the culture or the situation that you've put them in, that just their interactions with other characters provides the humor for
Mm-hmm.
the situation.
You have to always surround them with colorful characters. And I just,
Yes.
the last book I just finished was that, like, one of my jokes in my head was she's like a female Captain America.
Yeah.
And so I had to put all these colorful characters around her. And like, and her husband's a little more of a trickster than she is and such because she's just so earnest that it was like, okay, that's a lot. We got to put some
Yeah.
offsetting in
Well,
there.
and it's not that the super morally good Boy Scout people are not
Oh,
interesting.
they're very
They're
interesting.
very interesting. It's just it's I think sometimes they don't resonate as being as interesting as they are,
Mm-hmm.
unless you kind of put other types of characters around them to draw it out of them.
Mm-hmm.
Like the whole in the first Avenger, in the very first Captain America movie, it's so fun to see Steve Rogers compared with Howard Stark with
Oh,
Peggy
yes.
in between. and how Steve doesn't understand innuendo, and Steve doesn't understand how to talk to women, and just it makes him so adorable.
You have to bring in the awkward. You really
Yes.
do.
And it makes him, it shows that he is good and moral and but real
Yeah.
and authentic and uncomfortable. And man, we've all been there. And so it makes it easier for him to relate to when he is like this Superman who has no weaknesses or whatever. And where in comparison, I feel like a lot of us are more able to relate to Tony Stark personally because obviously he's made mistakes, he's gone down the wrong path, he's faced consequences, and so he's just dealing with it with as much humor as he can
Yeah.
because it's either laugh or cry, and
Yeah.
laughing is better.
And like genuine blind spots. And I think that blind spot humor and that blind spot realization is so relatable because we have those things. We honestly do not see it. And then suddenly it's right in front of your face and you're going, oh,
Yeah,
what have I been
yeah,
doing this entire time? Like I have everything in my life doesn't work anymore. Everything that I was basing my life around is completely meaningless. Or, there's moments where you just realize that you were completely in the wrong with something.
yeah.
And it was really bold for Marvel to go into that and to
Yes.
go into those hard places, which is what we see in things like the opening of Thunderbolts, where I loved Elena's like, yeah, my life is really hard. I just feel empty while she's like jumping off a building to go kill, to do some more assassination. That's all. It's all black ops. It's all black ops for the good guys. She's
Yeah.
killing off the bad people for the good guys, for the United States. But that whole sense of like something's missing, this is meaningless, and I think it's that willingness to go to that place, but then show how people are having those unhealthy coping mechanisms with it.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
think that can be a missed opportunity. Now, with this caveat, there is totally plenty of genre room for people who just write super serious books that just go into the dark, intense places and are unrelenting. That's a mood. We're not
Well, and
dissing that.
that's a genre. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's a whole
in
genre.
some genres, that's the expectation. And
Yes.
so if you are writing to that market anyway, don't. If you're writing to the super somber, dark genre,
Poetic
which
kind of
exists,
stuff. Yeah, that's
it's
great.
beautiful.
It's beautiful.
Don't don't make snarky quips.
Yeah.
That that won't go. That won't fly.
Yeah.
But if you are writing to more of the adventure style of readers, if you're writing to an audience that is not necessarily you know, uh, Edgar Allan Poe all the
Yeah.
time, if it is, if you are writing to a more broad audience that looks for entertainment in laughter or looks for hope or is looking for something that's a little more lighthearted, you need to include it. It can't be morose and grim all the time.
What I would say, even in the most morose stuff, and I mean, I enjoy poetic stuff now and then. I can really go for it. But
Hmm.
even then, a little bit of bleak humor, even if the
Yeah.
person, it's just in their POV, a little bit of bleak humor in there,
Oh,
just
humor.
chef's kiss. Like just the smallest bit in the most serious, the smallest bit of someone just making this sort of bleak commentary on what they're going through or stuff. It doesn't have to be over the top. It doesn't have to be like laugh out loud, but those little bits can add some texture to the storytelling. And when you add that texture and those different moods and everything, it just makes it more fun to read, honestly. It's sort of like even if you're given a piece of chocolate cake and it's all chocolate. Okay, it's just like five different kinds of chocolate. Maybe one's a chocolate mousse and then maybe it's chocolate this. Little variations there, can really help to create some variety, create reader interest, and create that connection point. So that's our little disclaimer there. If you were like the kind that's really like being called to write something super deep, poetic, gritty, determined, go for it. But also listen to this because maybe you can add tiny variations of humor to it. It doesn't have to be over the top kind of stuff. It doesn't have to be super sarcastic, but little tiny moments can really add some layers to your story.
Right. And we may get into this more in just a little bit, but there is a difference between situational comedy and character-based comedy. And I don't know if
Yes.
those are the right terms or not. But
Hmm.
you can there are stories where things happen that are just funny, silly, goofy, crazy, and that it's very easy to sort of poke fun at an event or something that happens or whatever. Then and that's a completely that is a genre of things. That
Hmm.
is a way to tell stories.
Yep.
But then there is another form of humor writing, and that's character based humor, where
Hmm.
your characters themselves are funny. And characters, the funny characters, can then go into any situation and bring humor to it.
Hmm.
You're not relying on a funny thing to happen. Your characters are already funny characters. And that actually saves it helps avoid some very awkward misunderstandings at times, especially if you're trying to write a story about mental health.
Hmm.
Because the last thing that anybody wants to do with a story that is about someone who is struggling with a mental health issue is to point fingers at them
Hmm.
or to make light of it or to indicate that what somebody else is struggling through or going through or experiencing is not valid or
Hmm.
not as difficult as it seems. And
Hmm.
so that's this one of the things I really loved about the Thunderbolts was they were not making light of anyone that had mental health issues. They just had a whole bunch of characters who are very funny,
Yeah.
and all of them are dealing with a situation. So it wasn't the situation that was being made fun of. It was the characters who were dealing with it in a humorous way. And so
Hmm.
that's the way to write about difficult things without making light of them.
Yeah, I love it. And I also love when you're thinking about approaching things this way. Let's check the comments real quick. Sophia Hansen, like concrete sheep. I love my concrete sheep. She's referring to, I think you're referring to book two of my Steel City Genie series, where that's a very traumatized and scarred character who is very much in denial about it. And then it comes out in her brain, like her brain just makes these really crazy things that happen around her to help her deal with her denial and stuff. And
Concrete
uh, she, well, her husband realizes that her brain can be very suggestive sometimes between points of stress, and so he like introduced this idea of like, yeah, so like concrete sheep, and she's like, no, please tell me you didn't say that. And she just gets this grin on his face, and she's like, he's a raven shifter vampire thing. He's got really mischief, and that one I will say for anyone for you, Sophia, that I actually slightly did base that. That's something that my husband would do. He's a very loving, kind guy, but if I had that situation, he'd be like, "Wait, so what about this?" And I'm like, "Don't, no, 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 no. I didn't need that idea, and now there
That's
it is."
hilarious.
So you can do things like that, but I think what really works in Thunderbolts as well with the idea of humor interweaving with the storyline too. And I love how you brought that up because that wasn't quite where I was thinking it was going to go, but that's a great place to go with this. Is the way the characters see themselves. These
Yes.
are anti-heroes, not in the whole sense of I'm a super cool, serious anti-hero, like I'm too cool for school and anti-hero. These are anti-heroes as in they don't really know how to be heroes. And not only that, they are so aware in their own brains that they are not the heroes of their story. And that is
Right.
so relatable. Like there is no sense of I'm the super cool outcast. And I think for a while we had Marvel was trying to do the super cool outcast in phase three a lot. Like, oh, I'm the
Yes.
super cool outcast this. I'm the super cool outcast. Here's the newsflash, guys. A lot of people who are outcasts, you don't feel cool.
You're not cool.
You don't feel cool. And even when people see you as cool, you don't feel it, which I love is Atlanta. Like, I mean, outwardly, if we saw in Hawkeye, Kate Bishop thinks Yelena is like she's annoying, but she's really cool. But Yelena doesn't see herself that way.
Yeah.
She's like, no, I'm not. I am not the hero. I'm just never destined to be that thing.
I'm a bad person. I've done bad things.
Yeah, so much that she can't even. And fascinatingly enough, that actually, I think it tells things that if we're going for a biblical angle, but that sense of your own weakness is a much stronger tied to the reality of being human than the
Yeah.
idea of I'm just awesome. You know, it's like, no, they're the ego here. There's some protective ego on the outside to stop others from getting in. You see that with U.S. Agent. Um, he's way back at the beginning of his journey. Like he's just starting his journey, but he's got a lot to go because he has so much protective ego
Yeah.
because he can't face the PTSD. He can't face how much he's messed up because it's devastating. Whereas Yelena's facing it and going, yeah, why do I get up in the morning now? And I just
Right.
found that was relatable because so much we're used to like glamorizing the antihero. And in this case, these were all heroes who were
Yes.
anti-heroes who were awkward. Like when you go around killing people for black ops, you don't know how to relate to people.
Right.
You don't even know like what to do with yourself. So you just kind of sit there and let you stare at your phone and
Or save a guinea pig.
save a guinea. Yeah, save a guinea pig.
Which when I in that scene where she saves the guinea pig, I was like, that should be the next version of Save the Cat.
Yes. Oh, that guinea
Save the
pig
guinea
was so
pig.
cute. I mean, you know, it was CGI in parts, but it was still very
Oh, of
cute.
course.
Um, but that's what I think is also so relatable about this. Is that these people, like everyone keeps saying, oh, well, they're cool because of this. And I'm like, I think one of the heartbeats of this is not necessarily making your characters underpowered or overpowered, but how do they see themselves
Right.
and how do they relate to each other? That can make them very relatable to the reader because people understand what it feels like to just be like, I'm not anything here. I'm less than nothing here.
I think it's a fascinating juxtaposition because if you compare it to the original Avengers movie, because I remember seeing the original Avengers movie in the theater and
Yep.
all the cheering and everything, and everybody was questioning how are you going to take all of these alpha type characters and put them on the screen and have them do anything together. And what I find very interesting in comparing the two, because you've got, you had Iron Man and you had Captain America and Thor and the Hulk and everybody, and they are big enough characters to have their own franchises individually. So, and they did in most instances. They had enough story behind them to have their own movies before the Avengers. And then you look at so individually, like you said, the ego was kind of there where they're all
Yes.
individually
Oh
their
my
own
gosh.
heroes.
Yes.
But then you pull up the Thunderbolts and they are all individually, but they're their own people, they have their own goals, they have their own path and journey that they're walking, and they have absolutely no interest in being a team. They don't want to work together. They have either been parts of teams before and have it's fallen through. They don't want to have anything to do with each other, but the situation forces them to work together. And it's in that discovery of a common goal that it's sort of the forced proximity trope without any romance.
Yeah. Very
And
much
it
so. Yeah.
and it's just an interesting thing because where the Avengers I feel like were friends. They were absolutely friends. I feel like what happened with the Thunderbolts was that they became a family.
Yeah.
Like
I
a
love that.
real
Yeah.
family. They saw each other's flaws and they were more willing to bear with each other's flaws. I think because they understood how flawed they were individually as well. And so they bonded together a lot more quickly than I think the Avengers ever did. And it was just it's a fascinating thing to kind of to compare one to the other. Um
Well, I think there's also a sense of great need for grace a lot more with that.
yes.
So the only one
Yes.
I could compare this to is actually Black Widow in the Avengers first Avengers movie because that was her arc. Is like she's
Yeah.
like what am I doing here? You
Why
know.
am I here? How
Yeah,
did I
like
get here?
cuz she's the black ops person there. And all these
We
other like
weren't
these
trained for this.
oversized yeah, these all she's got is some kind of super soldier serum which is nothing compared to I mean whatever the widows were given isn't as cool as what Captain America was given. So it means
Right.
she can do some pretty cool stuff and she can get banged up and not die. But like it's weren't trained for this. This is way bigger for that, which made her a relatable character. We can argue that I don't think the filmmakers knew what to do with that then. I'm talking to you, Age of Ultron. That was kind of strange. We didn't see that. The meant that the trauma arc has to be earned. You can't just force it in the second movie. But
Yeah, you know.
it's not the first time Joss Whedon does that. Sometimes he like
No.
he can
No.
force things occasionally. Um, but all of them coming in that place of we all need this. No one's coming in with the pride they had was the pride of I don't need you because I can kill people on my own. Or it's
Right.
almost the pride of like a vicious dog.
Right.
Then you know what I mean, like that biting people because they're so sure they can't be loved. Versus like the pride of I'm awesome. No one here is being proud because they
No.
think they're awesome.
No.
And once you strip that down, they're all like, no, we all kind of need a ton of grace here because we're all like messed up. And I loved how Bucky came in as kind of an who's gone through that journey. I know.
I like Bucky.
It's like him and Red Guardian were the two that were actually most healthy.
They're the best. I don't know if I relate to Bucky because he's just grumpy and old.
Yeah.
I feel a kinship to poor Bucky because he has permission to just be grouchy about things because he's
Yeah.
old,
But he
and
also
it
shows up. He's like, fine, I will help the
yeah,
misfits because even though I am
yes,
now in the House of Representatives, I'm still a misfit. Like
yes.
yeah, he kind of gets where they're coming from more than he does other things because he's been there so much.
That's one of the other things I really love about it is this beautiful love story to the misfits,
Mm-hmm.
the ones who don't blend, the ones who are on the fringes and who can't find a home
Mm-hmm.
with the normal people or the good people, and so they are able to work together to find a home with each
Mm-hmm.
other, and
And Bob.
it's and Bob and Bob is a whole nother story.
I love Bob.
I really like Bob a
Bob does
lot.
dishes. That's all we trust Bob to do. Bob, you can just do dishes.
You just sit in your chair, you just stay there. One of the things about another element of it that I really loved was, well, and it's again how rapidly they they became loyal to each other,
Mm-hmm.
where I think they really rapidly understood that if they were going to get out of this they had to do it together and nobody could be left behind. And I'm not sure if it's because they all loved Yelena, and Yelena was the glue that really brought them all together, or if they just coalesced into a team that was willing to go and get Bob and save him from himself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that required a lot of sacrifice, and there was one line that really stood out to me, and I've only seen it once, and it was a couple, probably about a month ago, and it's been a busy month. But there was this one line where, and spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, um, where the Thunderbolts have all come in and they're standing with Bob in his little safe room,
Mm-hmm.
and to get to him, they all had to go through the worst memories of their
Yeah.
lives to get there, and they had to conquer those worst memories to get to the place where they were trying to get. And Bucky said something to the effect of, "Oh, it's fine. I've had a great life." And it was just sort of that. And again, if you've watched all the Marvel movies, you know that ain't the case. Bucky has not had a great life. He has suffered in so many ways and became, he was like the turning point where like Civil War started, and he has done awful things and has memories of doing awful things. And so we can only just imagine. We saw what Yelena's horrible memory was, so we can just only imagine what Bucky's was. But in that moment, just that way he responded, that, "Oh, it was fine. I've had a great life." Obviously, we knew he was being sarcastic and it was funny, but on the other hand, it reveals the lengths that he is willing to go to help someone.
Mm-hmm.
And that, just on its own merit, is extremely heroic
Mm-hmm.
because we understand where he came from and we understand what he's had to battle through to get where he is. But that he would be willing to sacrifice himself to try to help these people that he's barely met them. Um, that I feel was a real bonding moment for them as a
Mm-hmm.
team. And well, and I don't know, I think about Bob. Nobody had ever been there for Bob.
Mm-hmm.
And to suddenly have all of these people who were willing to risk life and limb to help him when they weren't going to get anything out of it.
Hmm.
I mean, I don't know. It was a cool thing to see, um, where a bunch of flawed failures of humanity put their pasts behind them and work together to accomplish something as a team and win. And it was a refreshing change
Hmm.
to a lot of what has felt like, I don't want to necessarily say that previous Marvel movies have been virtue signaling, but they kind of have been,
They
where
have been.
or they have been so buried in plot that, and trying to connect the pieces to other parts of the franchise, or trying to make up for things that they may not have explained well enough in one movie, or whatever they're trying to do. um they lose sight of what the story is about.
Hmm.
And Thunderbolts didn't do that.
Yep.
Thunderbolts kept it laser focused the whole time, and it was a delight to see.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think lately with Marvel stuff, I think the last Marvel movie I actually really enjoyed, besides this, was Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings.
Shang-Chi's amazing.
But
I
again, that had another
love
character that had to deal with. He was totally fine, totally fine. Got this. He got this so much. No, he don't got nothing.
You
And
don't
his
got
like,
this.
yeah, and that was one of the last ones I remember that really went there again. And I think
Mhm.
there was a huge pressure. There was either having to tell hard stories where there wasn't a good answer, like WandaVision, which had great concepts, but I mean, the ending is really depressing because she just unrelentingly
Yeah.
doesn't, like, that's the story. She doesn't learn. The Scarlet Witch in the end is a very morally problematic character. Like, that's
Yes.
what she's in the comic books. So it's kind of like
Yes.
watching the tragic arc. And we're not talking multiverse of madness. That was a hot mess of madness. With some
Hmm.
gorgeous visuals. I will say some of
Beautiful
the
visuals, some
beautiful visuals.
fun moments,
Oh dear.
but problematic in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Um, but I think for a while they kept trying to figure things out and they kept adapting these properties that to a certain extent were written for certain agendas or to make certain things happen certain ways. And the problem is when you do that, then you lose the heart of what makes Marvel movies work. So
Right.
like for instance with like Ms. Marvel, which I actually enjoyed for what it was, but the
Yeah.
problem was is Ms. Marvel as the comic was partly written for ethnic representation. When
Yes.
you're doing that, sometimes you can't let your characters be flawed enough or like that because you're trying to give people someone to look up to all the time.
Right.
So you can't go to that tried and true Marvel depth with that while trying to create sort of a role model character. But then again, that was how the character was sort of created in the books. Again,
Right.
they had to also ram it into 6 episodes. For anyone who's read the comics, I'm sure they are probably way more in depth than what they had on the screen there. But that was the adaptation on the screen. It just everything felt like it was getting cranked out. It was rushed. They weren't taking time to understand what was going on in the characters' heads. They were just tossing properties out there right and left to see what stuck. And I think for authors that can help that sometimes when you're trying to think through this, getting this balance of humor with mental health stuff, it takes effort. It takes time. You can't
Yes.
always rush it. And that's hard in an industry like the publishing industry where there can be this feeling all the time that you have to just create really, really fast. And again, if you're on this channel, I'm all about your unique success. So if you're here and you're like, well, I just write absolutely to trope, Lord love you. I'm not sure why you're here, but that's great. Like, well, you are welcome to be here. That's we don't we kind of we endorse like writing fun things and then figuring out where tropes connect with it more than like always having to write exactly to trope all the time. But when you're thinking about trying to write this kind of dynamic, it takes more effort than it does to write a really fast book. You can't get around that. It's going to take more brain energy. It's going to take more heart energy. It's going to take more editing passes. You can't do it super fast and do it to a level that it actually resonates.
Well, and kind of like what you mentioned, where you can't just shoehorn trauma in
No, you
to a
can't.
story. You can't just decide, oh, we're halfway through this book. This character needs some more depth. I'm going to give them a mental health issue, and then act like it's been there the whole time. But you haven't actually done the
It's
research, or you haven't actually
unearned. Yeah.
exactly. If you haven't earned it, if you have not already worked that in to the character from the beginning, then you'll lose the authenticity of it for one, but you will also not properly represent the people who actually struggle with it,
Mm-hmm.
and they will notice, they will know, and people who know them will notice.
Mm-hmm.
And it is just as much important to do your research on mental health issues as it is on cultural sensitivities and any of these other elements that bring authenticity and accuracy to your stories. And again, if you're going to write, like Janine said, if you're going to write a trope, if you're
Mm-hmm.
just sticking within the framework of a given trope, and that's all you do, and that's great. That's
Yeah.
awesome. I mean, and that is a functional way to do this. I know
Yeah.
lots
I
of
mean,
people who
again,
have
and
done it.
I say this with all due
Yeah.
love. People like fast food too. I am not saying
Yes.
that to insult you. People like fast food too, and that is akin to fast food, and that is okay. And even when you do that, there can be people who read that and they still pull something out of it that's meaningful. That can happen. But
Absolutely.
that is a certain way of writing. And if you're going for something where you're trying to do a little deeper, if you're trying to meaningfully pull things together a bit more, which I believe you should, because why not? You're writing the story anyway, and that is something you can uniquely offer to it. Then it takes time to simmer.
Because you want to make sure that you connect the points that that need to be connected. You can't just shoehorn it in there because it is not going to read properly.
It
And
won't.
that is, and with Thunderbolts, I feel like they earned it. They presented these characters who all come from massively traumatic backgrounds, and in the case of Yelena, child assassin, the trauma we're dealing with there is off the charts. Walker, U.S. agent,
They
he's
took a
got
guy with massive PTSD and then gave him superpowers, like
right,
with no
and
therapy, by the way.
made a public spectacle of him, and then he failed in a public way. I mean, that there is not a whole much more you can do to someone in that position to tear them down.
Yep.
And then Red Guardian has his own issues, Bucky has his
Yeah, the
issues,
Ghost.
Ghost
You
has
saw a
her
lot more of her
issues.
stuff in Ant-Man 2,
In
where
yes,
where they actually realized, this is that she was the antagonist, and that who was also just desperately trying to find a way to heal herself from
and
government
to survive
experimentation. Yeah.
exactly. And so it's and Taskmaster and all of them, they have, and Bob, we know, did not come from a happy place before he found the group he got into. Um, all of those backstories worked together to create realistic characters who all struggle with their mindsets and their view of themselves, and who are looking for some kind of meaning or looking for some kind of purpose. And maybe they start at the beginning of the story with one understanding of, like, they're all working for the oh no, what's her name, Valentina? Yes.
Oh, that was a
Oh,
great. I loved her.
ah, she's amazing.
The opposite of
So
Coulson.
oh my
Oh,
goodness, she is the anti Coulson.
she's just terrible. She's
She's
just a hor-
awful.
They cast the perfect actress for
They
her.
did.
She's
I have
terrible
never,
person.
I have admittedly never been a big fan of
Julia Louis Dreyfus.
yeah, Julie Louis Dreyfus. I've never been a huge fan of hers. I haven't watched a whole lot of things that she's done. I was never into Seinfeld,
Okay.
and which I probably ought to be, because it's a classic show.
It is,
Um,
yeah.
but the minute that she walked onto the screen in some of the Marvel shows, I was like, ooh, I like her.
She's
She's
very, very interesting.
she's gonna be fun. And why on earth? And that was the other thing. She's known to be a comedic actress, and so why would they cast a comedic actress as a villain? And
It
like
just
just
works.
ooh. So it was a brilliant move on their part. But at the beginning of the story, all of them thought that they were there for one purpose. And surprise, that wasn't what ended up happening. And they had to just sort of adjust and pursue a goal together at the end if they wanted to make it out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, and like you said, grace. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like their own failures gave them a different perspective on each other's failings.
Yeah. And that really connects a bond between your characters with that. And it really just makes the story resonate overall. It makes it more potent and everything. And I would say, just kind of wrapping up this section, because we're going to do one final one on how
Yeah.
we could use world building with this, because this movie did a great job with that. And again, science fiction and fantasy authors, your world building should totally be involved. Okay.
Yes.
But when you're thinking about creating a character with some kind of mental illness or just mental difficulty, mental struggle, whether it's like a short-term illness thing or long-term thing, or whether it has to deal with a neurodivergent brain, which mental illness is comorbid with neurodivergent brain, but they're not necessarily the same thing. One is structural and then one is more a reaction to that. So you find them in the same place, but like someone on the autism spectrum can have depression and OCD and all this stuff, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone on the spectrum has that. So just understand that variation there. Like they're not the same thing. But when you're doing that and creating these characters, you have to figure out how it fits in their backstory. You have to figure out what is their opinion about it. Do they like it? Do they dislike it? Like Elena constantly makes sarcastic humor about it, whereas U.S. agents completely in denial 100% of the time. Ghost is sort of in a place where she just assumes she's a lost cause.
Yeah.
Bucky is kind of, he is healing, but then he's realizing he needs to go back and help other people
Yeah.
get through that. Red Guardian is sort of healed slightly by turning into some delusions of grandeur, but in a very well-meaning, loving way. Like he's a little over the top, but it kind of tries to work for him. So you have to think about not people don't their coping mechanisms don't look the same. And so you have to figure out when you're doing that with these characters, should you choose to do that, you have to figure out what their individual coping mechanisms are and what that looks like for them. And that's going to take you more time. That's a final thing. As someone who pretty much writes only misfits, creating my characters, and I know you get this because you also read a lot of misfits, is one of the like you have to go back and go, oh crap, I have to do more backstory. Okay, I have to do more of this thing. Okay, how is this going to impact this? And it's just a
Right.
lot.
You have to ask why. You can't
Tons
stop
of why.
asking why.
And
And
how do they
it's
respond to it? And
exactly.
how does it show up in their day-to-day life or not? Like, oh.
Nothing happens in a vacuum. I mean, there is always a cause. There's always an underlying reason for every belief that someone has or choice that someone makes. It's a rare thing for a person to make a choice without any prior motivation or backstory contributing to it. So the best thing you can do for any of your characters is to understand why they make the choices they make. But
Now
it
for
does take a little bit more legwork.
it does. It takes a lot more frawning at the screen. It takes a lot more work with beta readers. It takes a lot more work with just figuring out their internal journey, but it can be really worth it, and it can create that sort of addictive, sweet, salty, sour, acidic vibe that just makes you keep watching stuff. And so if you do that, it's one of those things that really pulls people in. It takes longer, so if you want to like write to market and be super speedy, there's a ton of tropes waiting for you. But if you're the kind of person that does write slower, wants to explore this, you can really bring people into the story and get them through it if you have that right combination, because it just has that balance again of like a perfect dessert that's like salty to balance the sweet and a little bit of sour and just really like makes you want to keep going. So, final thing as we wrap up, world building. Because what I loved about this, I went into this movie with no spoilers, which is a little unusual for me. I love my spoilers. But for some reason, I didn't read the spoilers for this. And so I didn't know what was going on with Bob. And I love how they personified depression through
Yes.
his power. Oh my
Yes.
goodness. The way it sort of consumed people and locked them
And
into their
locked
own.
them into their own personal spiral. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it was just a beautiful use of world building with that and how it all kind of weaves together. It was just wonderfully done. And so when you're thinking about incorporating world building into your story, whether it's giving your characters powers or giving them you know, special kinds of suits or stuff, you need to think about how the world building is interacting with all of that in science fiction or fantasy. Because if it's not, you're missing out. Okay, you can go over there and write like non-sci-fi or fantasy, guys. Come on, like,
Well, yeah, if you're writing speculative in any way, whatever world you develop, it must be integral, not just to your plot. It must affect your characters in some way. If you're not using your world to create the obstacles that your characters are facing, you're making your job way harder than it needs to be. And it's just natural that your world is going to shape the characters who live in it. So part of, and actually this is just one of the classes I got done teaching at Blue Ridge last week, was this idea of how you take world and character and plot and use them together to create one
yes.
integrated whole, because without that everything feels shallow. And
Or at the
if it
very least,
is
it's missing pieces. Like, why didn't you do
exactly
that? It just has these
exactly
broken links in it.
yeah. And the symbolic representation, I have not seen depression represented the way that they did with the void, and I thought it was brilliant. um and I also loved how they defeated him by group hug. But the idea that they weren't going to leave him, the idea that they weren't going to abandon him, they weren't going to let him go, and that was enough for him to pull himself together and pull them out of it. And just to have that as like the pinnacle moment of the show, where it just sums up everything that they've been working toward and all of the lessons that they've been trying to learn. I had this conversation with Katie the other day,
Yeah.
that the best stories have the same theme repeated
Oh yeah.
all throughout.
Oh, if you're not
Um,
repeating the theme, you don't have a theme.
yes,
Like a
and
theme is like Star Wars. The Star Wars theme is in variations all through the Star Wars movie. So if you're not
right.
repeating your theme, you have no theme.
And the example that we discussed was Lord of the Rings. How the idea of that the smallest person can change the world and make the biggest difference. And even though that was the focus of Sam's speech in the Two Towers, it was echoed by the choices of all of the other characters. You know, Aragorn, the disgraced heir who didn't believe that he would be strong enough to be the king.
Yep.
Or, you know, all of the other characters who made choices in line with that sentiment. And you can actually look at Thunderbolts and see the same thing, because all of them are flawed human beings who have pasts and they've all done bad things. But along the way, they make choices that kind of redeem their mistakes previously, and it brings them together until the very end of the movie, when it takes all of them together to solve the problem. And it's a beautiful way to represent not only how to conclude a story in an emotionally satisfying way, but also to show how you help somebody who is struggling with mental health issues. That
Yep.
you don't just leave them on the side of the road, and you don't just ignore them or pretend that they're making it up, but that you reach out to them and you meet them where they are, and you love them, um, and you show them that you see them. And I think that is why the Thunderbolts movie is resonating with so many people, because we've got so many people in the world who are dealing with anxiety and depression and abandonment issues and PTSD, and they feel like they've been left behind or left on the side of the road. And what a beautiful picture to be able to be the ones that stop and go back for them and bring them along. And
Yep.
I think it's very meaningful.
I think it just works great with that and everything. And I think that's really potent with the story. And with this one, you didn't have to worry about it quite so much because a lot
Right.
of the characters had smaller superpowers. So when you're dealing with characters who might have the world building is a bit bigger, this one they played a little easy because a lot of the like Ghost could go inside things and then come out of
Right.
things. One little power. Elena has a bit of a super soldier thing.
Hmm.
So does U.S. Agent. And then Bucky got his
Uh,
arm, and he's also got a super soldier thing.
yeah.
Red
And
Guardian's
Red
also got a
Guardian is
super.
also
They've all
super
got to
soldier
have their
thing.
serums because that's how
Yeah,
they're surviving being thrown into buildings. Like,
exactly.
and then the only one who really has lots of powers is Bob. And that
Right.
creates a thing. So when you're thinking about using powers or abilities or giving a character souped up things in any way, you you need to figure out how that works in the story and don't overdo it by giving everyone too much. I think that's
Exactly.
one thing for why the first Avengers movie, particularly, it had to dial back on some of like the deep level growth because you have so many power players in there. You just can't do it. So like Thor and Hulk and all of them had way more of a make way more individual journeys in their own movies. But when you put them on the same
Yes.
thing, it's really hard
Oh,
to
there's no
have
way.
all that. You just can't do it.
No,
But
you
if you're
can't.
thinking about
You
it in your
can't.
story, you need to have like maybe one or two characters that you really focus on their world building situation, whether it's a power or whether it's their special race or whether it's some kind of curse they have or something else. Don't overload it with too much because then it becomes a bit too much for the people to follow. If every single character on that team had powers as big as Bob's, it would be really difficult to manage. And so you have to find a way to focus on the core person whose world building and that how it's going to manifest with mental health shows up in the story, and then
Right.
find a way to sort of downgrade the others back, especially if you're doing an ensemble cast, so that you don't overwhelm people and they're just kind of like going, what is going on here?
Because yes, if all of them had powers like Bob,
Oh boy.
it just sounds funny to say Bob.
I love
If
Bob.
all of them have powers like Bob, the realistic way to effect that kind of a confrontation would be lots of flashy sparkles and booms and explosions, and you would lose the meaning of the story in all of the flash and all of the and I mean, I like explosions a lot, but if your story is nothing but explosions, you're going to miss the meaning. You're going to lose the point of the story in all the noise. And so you want to try to strike a balance, which they do. I think they do very well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they also do a very good job, I think, of assigning roles to the individual cast members, because that gives each one of them purpose and a
Yeah.
reason to be on the screen.
Very
And
much so. And I think that we're thinking about book how it shows up in books and such. One thing I have to do as someone who likes creating these big, exciting characters. And someone once said, "Oh, it was my editor." She says, "You realize you don't write a single small character." Like, oh, she's like every single character. She's. I had this one character who was like this Fey bookie, and she's like, this character alone, you gave her one scene, and she could have her own series. I'm like, okay, I
yes,
don't write small characters,
no,
but you find ways to bring them into the scene and introduce them in small ways, and that's
yes,
something I have to consciously dial back so that my main character and the antagonist and that can be in the forefront. So if you're the kind of person that can get really into the bigness, you have to, or if you love your characters the way me and Amy love our characters, and we have no small characters. I don't think you have a single small one either.
I
I think
don't.
the smallest character in your story, you know their whole backstory and where they are there, even if they're just giving someone a drink on the bar.
Basically,
You still you have to learn a little bit of self-control with yourself and say, okay, who is going to take the focus and how does this story, how does this plot showcase their power?
exactly.
Because interestingly enough, this whole thing with Bob having these periods that also showcased his power and his journey. And if one of them had been just as powerful, then it wouldn't have been about that journey.
Right.
And
Well,
yeah.
and even as much of a role as all of the characters played in this movie, primarily it's about Yelena. It's
Yes.
about Yelena and it's about Bob.
Yes.
And it's those two are going to be the focal point characters. Now the other ones add
Yeah.
context
There's no
and they
small
add
characters. They all
no.
have, they take up space.
And what I love how they did with Ghost is how they summarized her backstory, because she has a big backstory.
Yeah, she was the
She has
antagonist in a whole movie by
in a
herself.
whole Marvel movie, yeah.
Yeah.
But in this case, that wasn't important to the main story that they were telling, and so all we really needed to know was that she was this victim of experiments that gave her
Yes.
the ability to pass through walls. That's all we really need to know. Plus the fact that she's really snarky, and that she sort of is just another one of the snarky voices that's adding a different depth and dimension to the perspective of everything that's going on. We don't need to know anything else about her in this one. And many times when you have that many characters on screen, you have to summarize. But
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean that you are making them less important or that you are diminishing their significance in any way.
Mm-hmm.
They can still have as big a backstory as you want to give them. It just may not need to show up in this particular story.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when you're thinking about that and thinking about which characters you're going to showcase, usually it's like the two, one, like I would say Yelena is the primary protagonist, and then Bob, just by virtue of the fact that he has sort of a anti Captain America thing there, they make such a big deal about it. He's probably a secondary protagonist simply
Yeah.
because of the role the movie gives him. Focus on those, make sure that they make sense, make sure their world building is tight and interesting, and then go through, especially in edits, and call back the others so that those ones shine. It's okay to do that. It's important to do that for your storytelling. And it really, you know, if you end up falling in love with all the tiny characters, I don't know who does that here, that you just say, I'm going to write endless spin-offs.
I don't know anything about that.
But something else I would say is when you're going to do that, especially if you're going to give your characters any kind of powers or power. So powers as in magic or superhero things, or power over people or over things like that. Like Iron Man has a suit. You know, when you're thinking about that, figure out how that interacts with where their mental state is in a positive or negative way. And what is it showing about them as a person?
Yeah.
Never let it just be a power for the sake of a power. You can do something sort of flashy and fun for the sake. Not every tiny thing has to be meaningful, or it gets a little bit overdone. But still, be intentional about it as much as you can,
Yeah.
so that the
And
readers can build
always,
meaning from it.
yes, and always consider how any event or any choice is going to, where it's going to intersect your character's emotional growth journey, because depending on where an event or where something happens in their arc, they're going to react to it in different ways. Because they're, if they are on a journey from isolated anti-hero to fully engaged community hero, that is a journey that they're going to take throughout the length of the story. It's not an overnight suddenly you flip a switch and they're isolated and with reclusive tendencies here, and then suddenly they're over here and they're saving the world out of a sense of altruism or whatever. That doesn't happen overnight. There have to be things that happen along the way that teach them how to overcome the lies and the misconceptions that they've protected themselves with. And whatever event, if you have a big event that hits them at the beginning of their journey, they're going to respond to it in a completely different way than they would toward the end of their journey.
Absolutely,
And
as it should
so,
be.
as
It
it
should
should,
be.
exactly.
Okay. All right.
If
So,
it's not, something's wrong.
okay. So, as we're wrapping this up, Amy, what is one final? So, we're going to do two things here. We're going to do final takeaway. So, what is one final takeaway you have for people who are talking, wanting to build this like magical sweet spot with humor, action, and then mental health stuff? They're doing all three of it. So, what's one of the things you say, okay, you have to get this? And then what, because we love talking about books here too, what is one of your books that you're like, this is something that if you like Thunderbolts or that, I think you'd like this?
Okay. Probably the major takeaway that I would think of is kind of going back to the idea of character-based humor.
Mm-hmm.
Um, humor, using humor in any form, is the great equalizer. It is the it will open doors that would otherwise remain closed. It will lower people's guards. If you can come into a situation with a sense of humor or with a story that makes them laugh, there's something about humor that automatically makes people want to listen to you. And so if you it is really the best way to tackle any sort of difficult or challenging topic or unsafe topic. But the best way to do it is not through the situation, it is through developing a character who has either experienced trauma and is healing from it or is in the process of healing from it, but a character who can participate in the story in a way that is humorous, that allows that situation to not feel so dark and suffocating. And character-based humor is the highest form of humor, and if you can learn to master it, it will revolutionize your writing. And as far as and it will also help, it'll help with your action scenes too, because the better grasp of perspective and voice that you have in order to actually accurately and adequately communicate your character's sense of humor, you need to translate that into your action sequences as well. Because the way that you prevent an action sequence from becoming boring or monotonous is to stay in that deep point of view
That
with your
deep POV.
character,
Yep. Yep.
so that the action isn't just something that you're, telling them what's happening, but your character is experiencing the action and its results at the same time. And that keeps the action fresh and alive and full of tension. So, character based humor, character is king.
Hmm.
And then, as far as a book, that if somebody likes the Thunderbolts, actually, I would probably say the best one I could recommend is, well, actually, you know what? I was gonna say Ronnie. I was gonna say Ronnie Ackard and the Brotherhood of Blades, but I do have a new book that,
Okay.
well, a new old book that probably that hits the trauma notes and the strong characters and the misfits, and that is Nameless.
Yep.
Nameless is now my debut novel that released 11 years ago, is now back and available again, and it's the
Yay.
story of this misfit bounty hunter crew and this girl with amnesia who basically ends up running from a syndicate and doesn't know why, and every single person on board this crew is a dumpster fire. But they're lovable dumpster fires. So I would say that if you really enjoyed Thunderbolts, um, you would probably like Nameless. It's gritty. It's certainly got some edginess to it.
Yeah, I would say it's a bit grittier than Thunderbolts in terms
It
of that.
is. It is. It's
But
I'd
nothing's
say
gratuitous.
no, there is no gratuitous, nothing of that nature. But um, the so if you want something that's a little less edgy, I'd say Ronnie Ackard and the Brotherhood of Blades. But if you don't mind gritty, sort of a Firefly-esque kind of a space western, Nameless is going to be fun, and it also has a lot of humor in
Hmm.
it. So intentionally, because I knew the universe that where it was happening was so dark, I had to make characters who were very funny. And so it's, if you're looking for an example on how to weave humor and action together with world and some elements of PTSD. Nameless is probably
Just
a good option.
oh, and by the way, guys, it gets worse.
It does. It does. It
I've
does.
still not forgiven you.
I know. I know. But it does. It gets worse, and then it gets better, and then it's going to keep getting better because there's more coming.
Hmm.
So, Lord willing.
And I think for me, again, don't waste your world building.
Yeah.
Do not waste your world building with stuff because if you're tackling any kind of mental health issues, that alone is going to be a lot more for your story. That's why I don't tell authors they have to. I think it's great if you do, but it's not like I'm waving a flag for it in terms of if you're not comfortable, like don't force yourself because it's extra work and it takes effort to get it right. Like do the best you can, but like don't shoehorn it because it will feel shoehorned.
Yeah.
But if you're going to go for it in a sci-fi or fantasy book, then your world building needs to in some way interact with that. Doesn't have to be zero powers. It can be their position in that. It can be something to do with technology, something to do with the environment, but do not waste your world building with that because it's an incredible way to show that interaction with what's going on in the storytelling. And the wonderful thing about story, even if you're writing like low fantasy or low or hard sci-fi that doesn't have much in the way of crazy tech or crazy magic, you're still creating legal systems and and cultures and all of that. Don't waste the world building. Have it interact with your storytelling really profoundly, even if your story is lighter, because it's really going to create a much more immersive experience. And you get to. Welcome to sci-fi and fantasy. It's part of what we do here. So don't waste your world building. And as far as my books, I love writing misfits. Apparently, I have been accused that I can never write a completely normal character. I will just own this at this point. That's why misfits are one of my like taglines for my my kind of fiction is like misfits and heroic
Yeah.
tricksters. You know, the
It's
trickster.
not a bad thing.
Yeah, like you know that side character heroic trickster that you're like, wow, would it be fun if they were the main character? In my books, they're always the main character,
That's it.
or it's the misfit, and then you have that one. And like it's just that's the way I roll. Um, you can certainly check out my most recent one that's coming out. The Varison Blade, where the main character is dealing with PTSD and such, and she's my female. She's a Phoenix shifter. She's my female Captain America character. She's very much like, oh, I have
Nice.
trauma, but this is what I do. It's like, so she has a big growth arc of learning to get help from others, but it's the opposite of the like rah bitey. It's more of the nice and then totally goes off this way, ignores you, and does really harmful things because she has to keep serving. It's that one.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
That would be fun.
she has these arguments with her husband. He's like, if you just weren't so cute, you need to stop. No, like that. I'd almost say it's more seen as a feminine kind of stubbornness. I've seen it in guys too, but it's a very kind, sweet
Yeah.
stubbornness that will say, honey, and then just sneak out and go try to help people.
I love it.
So she's fun. It's in my Steel City Junior universe. So if you want to like find a lot of misfits, that whole universe, they're all misfits. No one in that universe has a healthy backstory. Just some of them cope better than others. Or in the case of my ice dragon, he just lives in the present, doesn't care.
Is that the one with the otter shifter? Yeah. I like him.
He's got a fan club. People keep wanting him to be a protagonist, but I think after he's seen what I do to protagonists, he's never. I'm sorry, guys. He's never. He loves his life now. He has no interest in it. I've tried so many times to put him in a story, and he doesn't. He doesn't want to.
None of our characters ever want to be protagonists in our stories.
No, no, no. Josie's the only one that she's been a little more willing, but she's so dang earnest that I have to let her sarcasm come out. It's a very quiet, again, very quiet kind of Captain America sort of sarcasm, but it's there. I had to dig for it real hard because she was
I like it.
So that's one. And if that one is a little bit of everything is PG-13 fade to black, but if you want like a little like less magic and you just want like superheroes, Nobody's Hero
Yes.
is also has that.
That's a good
So
one
the
too.
same level of misfits, but a lot lighter world building because it's just superheroes. So that would definitely probably be the closest connection to Thunderbolts in some ways, because of the lighter world building versus my Steel City Genie series has pretty heavy world building. So
Yeah.
if you're not into a lot of world building, Nobody's Hero is your game. All right. So thank you so much for making time for this, Amy. This is awesome. Thank you
So
all
much
so
fun.
much for hanging out with us tonight. It has been great. We really appreciate that. And yeah, we'll have to have you on again sometime
Please.
with a little more notice.
Eh,
you know,
this is fun.
it's
We can do this.
fantastic. And
We do
also,
this thing.
oh yeah. And if you guys love listening to this, hop over and make sure you listen to our other live streams because they're great. We have lots of fun things happening on our live streams. And do subscribe to Author Culture on Substack, YouTube, all of those things, because we have more fun stuff coming, and it'll be awesome. And speaking of that, go forth and be awesome.
Bye, guys.
Okay, and we're gonna